Hi, this is Scott, Kilo Sierra 6 Delta Alpha Yankee, and for today's video, we're finally getting a chance to take a look at that new Ailunce HA1UV. Now, my last video that I did, I talked a little bit about the HA1 Golf, and I will readily admit that a large part of why I chose to do that video as my last video was I knew this review was coming up. But I had been wanting to do an update on my HA1 Golf review and sort of give my long-term impressions of it and talk a little bit more about what I talked about in the last video, how this radio had kind of won me over, and I had found that, it's, as a GMRS radio, it's as good as a lot more expensive radios. So I was really genuinely looking forward to Ailunce eventually bringing out a ham radio version of this one. And of course they did. So I'll get this out of the way and we'll talk only about the HA1UV at this point and how it came into my possession. This is the first time that I've been able to put together a successful deal, I guess you can say, with Retevis / Ailunce. And by the way, Ailunce is just a brand of Retevis. So if I default and say Retevis, I'm talking about the same company. Those are the ones that manufacture this. But I've had kind of a contentious relationship with Retevis for a couple of years now, and I've never been able to, put it together in order to, do a review for them. And oftentimes it's because dealing with their marketing people was intensely frustrating. But I will say this: the guy they have running it now seems to know what he's doing, and he seems to understand the concerns that reviewers have of not being accused of, shilling and things like that. And some people are hesitant to do that, and that's why I pay for pretty much all of the radios that I review, because I like to maintain that objectivity. If I accept a radio for review from someone, I'm always certain to inform them that, hey, good or bad, I'm going to do my review. You're not, just because you sent me a $60 radio doesn't mean you bought my endorsement. And it's the same case here. I told Retevis, or at least I told the marketing guy at Retevis, hey, I'm gonna review this thing, comprehensively, honestly, and objectively, for the good or the bad. You need to know that. He had no problem with it whatsoever. And I suppose it comes from a certain level of confidence, knowing that he wasn't going to send me something that was going to be sketchy. Long story short, I was able to connect with Retevis, and they sent me an advance copy, the HA1UV. I've had it for a couple of weeks now, and I've been able to use it enough to get a really good handle on what this radio is and get to know it quite well. And I have to say, I like it, and I like it a lot. As an affordable, a new entry into the affordable radio market, this thing is gonna have an impact. I think a lot of people are gonna like this radio, and they're gonna like it for a number of the same reasons that I like it, because they have put some effort into designing a radio that is tailored pretty aggressively towards the outdoor community, the kind of people that are going to use these radios not from the comfort of a ham shack, but from, a rainy, muddy trail up in the mountains, or out kayaking, or what have you. This is the kind of radio that you can take out there and use with some degree of confidence. So let me first talk about the general specifications of the radio, and then we'll do the usual thing I do where we kind of walk around the radio and take a deeper look at the features. So the basic specifications are this. It is, in terms of how much it costs, it's going to market probably in about the $60 range. That's what I seem to be seeing in the ad work going out. Now, they've got a pretty high MSRP that's crossed out with the sale price, but it sort of looks like this is going to fall about in the same price spectrum as the HA1 Golf, and that's going to be around the $60 mark. And that's a fair price for this radio, because there are other radios that cost more than this radio that are not as good as this radio, plain and simple. I can name one particular radio that I actually think pretty highly of that retails around the $110, $120 mark, that I like a lot. This radio is better than that radio. It just is. I hate to admit it, but it is. And I'll be talking more about that in the future, trust me. But that's not the subject of today's video. We're talking about nothing but the HA1UV today. $60 dual band analog HT. The radio you receive will arrive locked into the amateur radio bands. Having said that, this radio is very easily unlocked for expanded transmit. And unlike the HA1 Golf, which had sort of a complicated sequence where you had to download some special software, and then even once you'd done that, every time you wanted to use it out of band, you had to do the unlock sequence. If you had turned the radio off, every time you turned it back on, you had to do the unlock sequence. When you unlock this one, it stays unlocked. And I'll tell you, it's as simple as this. You hold down the PTT button, you hold down the 8 key, the number 8 key, also says save on it. So hold the PTT down, hold the save button down, and turn the radio on while holding those down. You will see a little text box pop up that says expand, and it gives you the frequency range, and you're good to go. Radio's now wide open. And what I mean by wide open is it will transmit within its receive range. So the normal transmit range, if I mentioned it already, I'm going to do it one more time. Locked into the amateur radio bands, it's 144 to 148 megahertz for VHF, 420 to 450 for UHF. And then the receive range, which is also now, if you've unlocked it, your transmit range, is 136 to 174 for VHF and 400 to 480 for UHF. So if you've done expanded transmit, that's the range that you can now transmit in. So what that means is it'll do not only amateur radio stuff, but it'll also do GMRS, MERS, and other out-of-band frequencies. Now, with great power comes great responsibility. I've talked about this plenty in the past. It's a good thing to have on your radio for emergency communications, but it does require a certain amount of responsibility because you are stepping outside the rules. So be careful how you use that. That's all I'm going to say on that. I'll let you be adults and figure it out for yourselves. But it unlocks pretty darn easily. How about that? Now, moving on, 256 channel capacity as far as memory goes. You are able to allocate those 256 memory slots a couple of different ways. You have two schemes. You have one as zones and the other one is scan lists. So one applies to what your display is locked into, and the other applies to what channels or frequencies that you're scanning. So you've got a pretty good number of available zones. The only problem is they are limited. Each zone in each scan list is limited to 16 channels only. But where it comes to zones, and you can elect to run the radio showing all frequencies available and scanning all frequencies available, or like I say, you can select a zone or a scan list for each of those roles. So for zones, let's say you had an event coming up and you were going to have a primary, an alternate, and a contingency frequency on your radio, and maybe one more. So you only need 4 frequencies, and you want to lock your radio down so those are the only things that the radio will access. You could create a special zone, assign those channels or frequencies to it, and once locked into that zone, you turn that channel control knob. It's only going to cycle through those 3 or 4 channels that you've selected. So you can lock things down so you're not all over the place, because I've been there where you've turned the knob too far or forgot where the hell you're at, and it takes forever to get back to the original frequency. Now for scanning, again, you can scan every frequency on the radio, or you can set up lists. And again, each list is limited to 16 channels or frequencies. But when you hit the scan button, it'll only scan those and not all of the other frequencies on the radio. That feature alone on a $60 radio puts it head and shoulders above other radios in its price class, because not a lot of radios do that. You got to pay a little bit more usually to get that kind of functionality on your radio. So that's pretty cool. Moving on, what else can we talk about? In general specs, probably the most important thing. This radio is IP67 rated. What that means is this radio can be submerged to a depth of 1 meter for 30 minutes and resist water intrusion the entire time. So that means that this thing will survive pretty much any rainstorm that you're ever going to be in. But if the radio gets dropped into the water, or if you're using this in a maritime environment, you don't have to worry about if the radio takes a dunking, it's not going to die as a result. That's really critically important as an emergency communications radio. So now let's let me give you my general impressions of the heft, feel, and build quality, and then we'll go around the radio and look at the features and talk a bit more about it. But along with that IP67 rating, this is a rugged, or has a very rugged feel. How about that? This radio does not feel cheap. It does not feel flimsy. It does not feel toy-like. It's got a good solid feel and a good solid heft to it. But at the same time, it's not too heavy, but it feels professional grade. It doesn't feel like a toy. And a lot of the radios in the cheap Chinese realm, which I kind of define as the radios that are, $27. A lot of times those radios look pretty cool, but they're advanced toys is really all they are. They're not to be taken all that seriously. This is getting into the realm of a radio that you can start to take seriously. So the heft, build quality, and feel of the radio, coupled with the IP67 rating, starts putting this in the direction of emergency communications gear. The kind of radio that you can take on a trail, you can take out into the woods and not have to worry about it breaking on you. Now, something else I should also throw in here before I start talking about the features is it does have a direct conversion receiver. Because when I start talking about MCOM radios, a lot of times people, the first question out of their mouth is, what kind of receiver does it have? Now, there's a certain mythical quality to the super heterodyne receiver that I bought into for a long time myself. And I got to tell you, I've had super heterodyne receivers get overloaded by RF. Even a super heterodyne receiver, you can defeat the filtering on those eventually as well. Now, I will say, for certain aspects of reception, super heterodyne is kind of the order of the day. But for what we're doing here, direct conversion receivers, which is what this radio has, it is not necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of, again, going back to that cheap Chinese radio equation, there are a lot of radios on the very cheap end of the spectrum that have direct conversion receivers with little or no filtering whatsoever that have given direct conversion receivers a very bad name. But there are some radios out there that are quite good that have direct conversion receivers. The Yaesu FT65, the ICOM ICT10, the Yaesu FT4X, some of the Ocean radios have direct conversion receivers and are good radios. This too has a direct conversion receiver, but so far I've not had any problems with the front end getting overloaded or any kind of intermod issues whatsoever. I'm not saying that can't happen, but what I am saying is I'm pleased so far with the receiver on this radio. So now we can jump into kind of doing our walk around. So the first thing you're going to notice when you start handling this radio and looking at it is the antenna's on the wrong side. There's nothing saying that the antenna has to be on one side or the other, but oftentimes the antenna is on this side, and we're accustomed to seeing that, unless you're high terra and then they put the thing right in the middle. But I will say there is actually an advantage to having the antenna on this side. And that is if you carry this thing on a carrier, either a plate carrier or maybe even, a flotation vest or something, and you have it off to your left side for a right-handed person, with the antenna on this side, you'd be surprised how quickly that antenna on this side starts coming up and getting in your face or getting up under your chin. And I have taken radios that have the antenna on this side and turned them around so the antenna would be more out towards the left side of my body, especially when I was using a whip antenna, because it was easier to feed the antenna up into my shoulder strap on my carrier. This antenna location, I actually like. It's pretty cool. So I guess this will be the point at which we start examining the radio close up. So let's pop the antenna off, and I'll tell you another cool thing that they did. Again, thinking, paying attention. The center conductor pin that penetrates the radio, actually forms that connection between the radio and the antenna, okay, is on the antenna side here. All right, so that means the radio connection is SMA female and it's SMA male on the antenna. This is my preferred arrangement, by the way, and I'll tell you why. It's not that difficult to screw up putting an antenna on and end up bending or deforming that center conductor pin. Now, if that center conductor pin is on the radio side, as we often see with import Chinese radios, they put it on this side. If you bend or break that antenna or break that center conductor, the radio's dead. You can't do anything about it. You have to send it back for repair or get another radio. If I bend or break the pin here on this antenna, I just put in another antenna on my radio and I'm back in business right away. So this is the preferred method. I like that they did that. I like it a lot. Now, another little detailed note is notice this skirt that's at the bottom of the antenna. This is actually a gasket, and it syncs up pretty well with this opening for the antenna as it locks down, and boom, now we have a gasketed connection at the antenna. I like this so much that I don't really have any plans to change out this antenna. And the fact that this antenna is actually pretty good to go, I don't have any issues with this antenna whatsoever. It receives well. I get good signal quality on send. I'm okay with this, other than the fact that it's not terribly flexible. This works for me, so I'm probably going to keep this as is. If I needed to reach out and get a little bit more range, I could throw a whip on there as a temporary measure, but for day-to-day stuff, this is good to go. I like it. Now moving across the top of the radio, note the orange button here. Now this is the first of your programmable keys that are on the radio. This is your top key. It's programmable for a short or long press activity. Now by default it comes set up for your emergency, to set the emergency and make it chirp and make a bunch of noise. I don't really care for that. So what I have this currently set up for is on long press, it adjusts my transmit power, and that's it. Moving to the center, we do not have a flashlight. Instead, we have the thing that should be there, and that is your channel control knob or selector knob up at the top. I like this. It means that if it's in a pouch and I've got this thing locked into a zone that only involves 3 or 4 channels, I can just rock back and forth between the 3 or 4 channels with the radio in the pouch, and I'm good to go. I like that a lot. Moving to the left, we have our on-off volume control knob. Got a little built-up area here to protect it from damage, and not much to say about it really, but it does control the volume, and that's something I will talk about. Kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but the speaker on this radio is incredibly loud. Just like the HA1 Golf, this is one of the loudest radios that I own, and I like that because sometimes you do need a heck of a lot of volume. But let me show you where I normally put this when it's sitting off to the side of my my recliner in my little room here. I have it turned to about there, and that's adequate. So from off to about there is all I need, plain and simple. Cranking it all the way up here is just the land of insanity. It is crazy loud. Now we have a status indicator LED at the top that's going to tell you if your radio's transmitting or if you have traffic coming in, and does flashes and does what LEDs do. Moving to the left side, I guess that's the left side. I should look at it from the front. We have our PTT. Now this has a nice kind of zombie green accent color to it, so it's visually eye-catching, I suppose. You got a little built-up area at the top to prevent inadvertent activation. It's not overly sensitive. It's got a good positive feel. It's not hinged in any way, and there are no dead spots. Everywhere you press on here, you're going to get PTT activity. Moving below that, we have 2 additional programmable side keys that are programmed for a short or long press function. And there's a lot of different functions you can program onto here. What I have this set up for is long press starts and stops scan, and long press on the lower key starts and stops Monty. Beyond that, don't really have any need for the other features, but you can set it up to do things like turn your FM radio on, which I didn't mention earlier when I was talking about the receive range, but yeah, like a lot of other radios, this will do broadcast FM radio. So moving to the front, from the top down, we have our microphone port is up nice and high and out of the way, so you're not going to cover it with your hand while you're talking. We talked about the speaker already, but it's an IP67 radio, and oftentimes they sound a little muffled. That is certainly not the case with this radio at all. Let's go ahead and turn the radio on so you can see the splash screen, and you'll note the largest of the 2 names that appear is going to be Retevis, with Ailunce just beneath it. We have our display, which is a kind of a white on blue motif. Unlike the HA1 Golf that I got, which now has been corrected via firmware, by the way, you don't have that crappy looking black text on blue background. That was a mistake, but they fixed it. They fixed it on the HA1 Golf. If you have an older one that has black on blue, the black text on blue background, you can do a firmware update and correct that with no problem whatsoever. The way this works out, the blue indicates which of the 2 areas, which you have your A zone and your B zone, because it's dual watch radio. So The blue is going to be your active band. So if I press the PTT, it would be transmitting on 446.500. You toggle that by short pressing the scan key, and it'll take it down. And now if I key up, it'll transmit on TCARC4, then toggle back. All of the usual indicators here. We have a battery strength indicator. We have a transmit power indicator, bandwidth indicator, channel details here, channel slots, on and on it goes. Moving down to the actual front panel, the menu key reveals a menu that is excellent. When I say excellent, I genuinely mean excellent. The front panel on this thing, the programming menu is superb, actually. I had a little trouble getting the computer programming software or customer programming software from Retevis for this radio. So while I was waiting, I wanted to put some details into the radio, and I had an occasion right after I got the radio where I had to kill like 2 hours sitting and waiting for somebody, and I had this radio. So without a manual, I turned the radio on, started messing around in the menu, and with very little difficulty whatsoever, I had about 60 channels programmed in on this thing in about 2 hours. And it was not that hard to figure out. And that included entering the frequency, saving the frequency to a memory slot, naming the frequency with alphanumeric characters, and getting it all set up. I even set up some zones and some scan lists and applied those channels and started applying those channels to the zones and scan lists. And it was not at all difficult to do with this menu. It is very intuitive. It's laid out perfectly. So yeah, I really like what they did with this. So you're not going to have a heck of a lot of trouble programming this thing from the front panel. Now I do have the virtue of I program a lot of radios from the front panel, so certain things, if you know, they kind of apply over. But oddly, there were a couple of odd changes that they did that are actually improvements to the way this is normally done, because normally you go to VFO. I won't explain the whole sequence, but normally the way it works is you go to VFO, enter the frequency, then save it as a memory channel. They have a very interesting little shortcut in there where you don't even have to do that. You can just jump directly into the next open memory slot and start modifying it and naming it. So it saves some steps. It was a really innovative idea. It probably only impresses me and 4 other people on the planet, but I thought it was cool. So let's see, what else can we look at here. Exit out the menu, obviously. We have up-down arrow keys here, which of course we have a channel control knob and selector knob at the top, so that works whether you're changing a channel or whether you're in the menu and you're cycling through the menu. But also you can use the up-down arrow keys, and you can do the same for running through your frequencies with that. So sometimes it's helpful if you're holding the radio in your hand. You can just use your thumb and move around. You don't even ever have to reach up to the top. Very good touch there. Not much else really to look at here. That's more from a programming perspective. But okay, let's go ahead and turn it off and go to the other side, and let's look at that speaker mic connection. As I mentioned, radio's IP67, and so is the speaker mic connection. Rather than having the typical K1 type connection where you have a 3.5 millimeter, 2.5 millimeter sockets that you plug into, and you see that on a lot of IP67 radios, you pop that cover off and put a speaker mic in, it's not IP67 anymore at all. This, however, uses the contact strip type setup taken from Motorola, and that means that when you put a speaker mic on here, it's still going to be IP67. Very, very nice touch. Now, it does limit the number of speaker mics that you can get for this, but Retevis has some really good speaker mics for this, and there's some others that are compatible. But just know that not a lot of the Motorola my speaker mics are going to be compatible because it's a little different layout. But Retevis has a decent selection, and I'll do a follow-on video where I show some accessories for this that includes one really nice speaker mic for this that isn't terribly expensive. Moving to the back, got a nice solid belt clip on here, and the battery features USB-C charging. Now, this comes with a charge cradle, and the charge cradle is powered by a USB-C cord. That same cord can be used to charge this radio. So you get the best of both worlds. You can charge it via a desktop cradle charger, or you have field charge capability via USB-C, which I'm now a big fan of. The battery latch is at the bottom. You simply pull down, slide the battery out and off, and that reveals a 2800 milliamp hour lithium battery. And battery life, I can tell you, is pretty good. I'm on my third charge, but I've been using this kind of extensively now for, a couple of weeks. But I have no issues as far as battery life on this. It's got a good long battery life for what it is. But 2800 milliamp is perfectly adequate. Got our FCC sticker and identifying information there. Gasketed battery connection here. Putting the battery back on, locks in place, no problem whatsoever. Now, that's the general walk around on the radio. Let me talk a little bit about testing on this that I've done. Did spectrum analysis on it using the little tiny SA, and no problems there. It's not a super clean receiver, but it also didn't fail either. Kind of middle of the road, but it's not a. You don't have to worry about, at least in the case of this particular unit I received. Didn't have any objectionable spurious emissions. It passed the testing criteria, but it throws some spurs out. It's not super duper clean, but like I said, passed the standards. So the next thing we need to look at is the output power, and here's where I'll talk about the first kind of not negative. Well, how about this? It falls into the same standards as a lot of other radios, but it doesn't meet a stated specification. So I guess you could call it a minor failure. So they claim 5-watt output on this radio. And I'm sure there's somewhere in the radio, there's one particular frequency or something that gets close to 5, but I couldn't find it. So my output power testing that I did on my digital, I think it's an MFJ. It's one of the desktop meters. Hang on, I'll grab it. It's this monstrosity right here. It works. I have a love-hate relationship with this piece of gear also, but I did verify accuracy on this thing a while back, so I'm getting good readings out of it. But it's an MFJ, I don't know, MFJ 849 digital watt meter. So what I got for output power was on VHF 146.420, 3.78 watts on high was what I got there. 446, 4.05 was my high output power. 446.500, 3.97. Channel 1 GMRS 3.67, channel 15 3.68, and channel 8, which is not supposed to be 3.5, was 3.5 watts, but that's out of band. So there you go. But the upshot on this is they claim 5 watts. Best I could get was 4.05. Now, how does that compare to other radios? Admittedly, there are some other radios that are actually in the affordable radio zone that do meet their stated specifications on output wattage, but this one does not. So yeah, you're going to be about 1 watt understated. Now, any radio you're talking about, if it's a dual band radio, you're going to have one band where it's going to have a higher output wattage than the other. So oftentimes, you'll be able to get 5, for instance, on UHF, but only 4 on VHF. And everybody kind of knows that. And that sort of seems to be the case with this radio, but it's down just a little bit. So UHF 4 is the highest, and then VHF it tends to trail under by, I don't know, not a heck of a lot. How about that? But there are radios that are actually pretty well thought of. Yaesu VX6, for instance. Kind of an expensive radio. It's one of the upper end radios. And a lot of people think very highly of it. I've never myself seen one that'll do 5 watts. The ones that I have, the best I can get is 4 watts. FT65, same thing. 4 watts. Doesn't get anywhere near 5. FT60, same thing. Don't get anywhere near 5 watts. It's generally, 4. I think one of them, I have one that'll do 4.5 watts on one particular frequency. So you have to kind of temper your expectations, but it would be nice to report that it hit their stated output wattage, but it doesn't. Now, having said that, is it still usable with its current output wattage? Yeah, it hits every repeater I can hit with any other radio that I have in my region. Plain and simple. Now, I haven't tried any any repeaters. You know, I haven't done like a distance test. Like I don't have, for instance, one repeater where only one or two radios that I own will hit it. Pretty much any of my functional HTs that are putting out anything above 3 watts can hit anything in my area as far as repeaters go. But I will say 4 watts is not 5, so I'm not going to apologize for that. Just going to report it. There it is. So it's a little low on the output wattage, but I think that's going to be in, you know, it's one of those is what it is kind of things. The only other negative thing that I can report on this radio, and it doesn't have anything to do with the radio in actuality. It has to do with the programming software. Now, I eventually was able to obtain some programming software from Retevis. But this, at first, I replied back to the guy and said, I think you sent me the wrong file, because when I opened it, it doesn't look like a CPS at all. It looks like some kind of admin program from the factory. But when I started digging around within the program, I realized, yeah, this is programming software, but it's kind of from a more industrial approach. It doesn't have any kind of like user-friendly user interface. How about that? It's got no clever facade. It just looks odd. You can get into all of the parts and pieces of the radio in terms of programming it. I was able to set up zones. I was able to set up scan lists. I was able to fill out the rest of the channel details. But boy, was it a pain in the ass, and it was hard to figure out. It's not at all like the one for the HA1 Golf. Now, the HA1 Golf software will not program this radio. I already tried it, but I can tell you that the programming software for the HA1 Golf looks like programming software that we're used to looking at. The stuff I was sent does not. It is my hope, because I checked today, and today's the release date. I checked today to see if they have programming software available, and they don't yet. So I'm guessing they're still working on that. There is no available programming software today, but again, today's the release date. I'm expecting sometime in the next week or so we'll probably see some software for this, and then, you know, I'll report back on it then. But I certainly hope that's not what they intend to go forward with, because yeah, as programming software goes, it was the opposite of intuitive. Definitely way different than the menu. In fact, if that's the only software they had out available for it, I would just program the whole thing from the front panel, call it a day. But here's the good news. If you wanted to do that, you can. So I think I've talked enough about this radio. Let me give you my final proclamation on this. This radio possesses a number of unique, interesting features that are good to go for emergency communications. It's rugged. So far, it's been reliable, dependable. It's got excellent weather protection, and like I said, good, solid, robust feel. This is a radio that I would feel pretty confident with taking on a trail, and not as some kind of substitute or some kind of test or something like that. I would have no trouble whatsoever running with this as an EDC radio, an everyday carry radio. And it's probably going to end up being on my go bag for a little while, because I'm enjoying this enough and I find it interesting enough and I like it enough. I'm going to use it just because I friggin' like it. It's a cool little radio, and I'm going to do that unironically. And I've got a lot more to say about this radio moving forward. This is the review, but this is something that definitely is probably going to merit like an operator series, some follow-up videos and accessories and stuff like that, because I think this thing is going to have an impact on the radio community. There's a lot of radios out there right now, and a lot of them are junk and garbage. A lot of them are kind of mediocre and half-assed. This one, you can tell they put some thought into it. There's things in here that should have been there on a lot of other radios, but they're here on this one. So I'm going to say really good job, Retevis. Really good job, Ailunce. You did something neat on this one. Now I know why you were pumping this thing so hard and trying to get it out there to all the people, because yeah, they're going to sell a bunch of these. So I can give this thing 2 thumbs up. You know, as an entry-level MCOM radio, this is going to go pretty high on my list moving forward. So with that, I will thank you for listening to this obnoxiously long review video. But I tend to, if you see one of my review videos and they're kind of long, it's because I really like the radio and I want to make sure I cover all of the cool stuff on it. So thank you for sticking with it if you're still here at the very end. Have a wonderful day. This is Scott, Kilo Sierra 6, Delta Alpha Yankee from Visalia, California. Take it easy.